Welcome to Week 6 running back edition for the RotoCurve videos. I, of course, am Ricky Sanders with Jim McCormick here. But before we get started, we, of course, have this NFL trial here on RotoCurve for Week 6, which is basically a premium membership for free, which includes exclusive position rankings, projections, cheat sheets, must-have tools like DVP rankings, points per attempt, red zone, optimized DFS lineups for both the big sites, DraftKings and FanDuel, access to player ownership percentages. So let me give you a look at what we got here. We have got rotocurve.com/NFL-trial. All the stuff I just told you about. Jim, let's go into the receivers this week, because you and I were just talking pre-show that you and I and the RotoCurve tools usually like one of the top receivers, right? I mean, it's usually Antonio Brown, AJ Green. Which of those guys do we get into our lineup this week? But you and I don't think it's necessarily, a must this week, especially in cash games, to go with one of those guys. Which of the mid-tier guys do you like instead?
Yeah, I think just to piggyback on the running back thing, like why this, it's almost like it fits like a puzzle, right? Because it's the week to pay up at running back. We love, obviously, Le'Veon Bell. His floor is ridiculous. His ceiling's ridiculous. He has it all. We love LaShawn McCoy, and we also love Lamar Miller. So and even DeMarco Murray. There's all these situations that are just so ripe, and you have to pay up to get those guys in your lineup. Now, they don't cost the same as these elite receivers, so it's not as dramatic. But as you suggested, getting 3 of those guys is even advisable, which doesn't leave a ton of room to get one of these $8,000, $9,000 receivers. Which is to say, I love Antonio Brown's setup here, but the cost certainty at $10,000, you're paying something for that. When realistically, I could get the same point expectation out of Le'Veon for $2,000 less, right? So that's kind of the argument there, is that if we want to get a share of that awesome matchup, let's get Le'Veon instead of Brown, which you don't hear us say that often. You don't hear us pivot off of Antonio Brown very often. I guess the guy that I really like, that you do, I believe as well, is Jarvis Landry. Is a guy who I just think the floor is, again, to talk about floor, it's a word we use too often, but really what we're saying is just our baseline expectation for what his outcome is really strong, right? I mean, last week was kind of an outlier in terms of his receptions. Other than that, he had 7 receptions in every single game. He's got only Antonio Brown and Julio Jones have more receptions than him the start of last year. He's got 144 receptions since week 1 last year. Tennessee ranks 27th in pass coverage on Pro Football Focus. So the matchups, the usage, they all align. I also really like Doug Baldwin in cash. He's a guy who, I think what happened is, going into this year, the redraft world kind of painted him as a regression candidate overall. And it makes sense because he had 14 touchdowns, right? It was almost like that one Jordy Nelson year, like 2009, where 106 targets, 14 touchdowns. Well, here's the difference. The target rate is much higher than it was last year. And since week 10 last year, he's 4th in receptions, behind only those 3 guys we just mentioned. So he's a volume guy with touchdowns and the most efficient quarterback per attempt over the last 3 years in Russell Wilson. We've already talked about how Atlanta is a good setup for any offense right now. Even as they've been winning, they've been outscoring you, which sounds like a Charlie Manuel line, but it's true. They've just been outscoring you. They've been putting up more points rather than actually holding you down. I think last week their pass rush was more about Denver being bad and leaking a lot, and Paxton Lynch holding the ball for 3+ seconds, than it was about Atlanta having this good defense. That Vic Beasley explosion, I think, is fake. I think Baldwin is a really safe guy who has upside as well. So those are my 2 key cash receivers right now. Other than that, I actually don't mind the pricing on Marvin Jones either. I know it's still lofty, but with Tremaine Johnson being out, it opens up a nice setup here for him to go ahead. I mean, I know I forget the guy's name, the other cornerback that they're going to be sending over to him. He's allowed 71% completion rate. I was just looking him up. But in any case, it's a good setup for Marvin.
EJ Gaines, is that who you're talking about?
No, it's the other guy. I'll find it when you go over your guys. I'll go over. But those are basically my 3 guys. Like, I wouldn't mind having those be my 3 receivers on DraftKings.
Troy Hill, is that who you're talking about?
No, there's even somebody else. You do yours, and then I'll
okay. All right. I got a list of their corners up right here. But all right, let me piggyback off you on Jarvis Landry. Best individual matchup according to Pro Football Focus this week. Had been targeted at least double-digit times before last week. I think we both agree that was quite the outlier. The offense wasn't working as per usual, and we wonder why. They weren't getting their guy involved, so they got to get him back involved. They're going to be playing from behind at home, so I think you got to like that setup for Jarvis Landry. The other guy in that mid tier that I really like is Jeremy Maclin. We kind of alluded to it in the quarterback that there was a receiver I liked for Alex Smith. That, of course, is Jeremy Maclin. And I mean, what's not to like here? You look at kind of his BVP numbers last year, which I know they've gotten a nice new corner in Sean Smith this year. But I mean, 2 games he scored 3 touchdowns, which is very un-Maclin-like. 12 catches over 150 yards, and now you look at this Oakland team this year. I know they've kind of gotten better as we've gone on a little bit, but still they rank dead last in fantasy points allowed to receivers. It's not really that close. Tampa's second by kind of a wide margin. So I think even Andy Reid can't screw this one up in terms of game script. You got to look for the receivers in this one. You got a good one, Jeremy Maclin. So I hope, and I'm betting on it in all formats that they feed him. And the guy that we were talking about before the show that I tweeted about earlier this week that I'm sticking to is Cole Beasley. I mean, this guy's had at least double-digit fantasy points in every week. I've kind of my theory for this week is that there's going to be an uptick in volume for Dak Prescott because it's going to be harder for Zeke to run than it has been any game this year. While I still think they go to him a bunch of times, it's just not going to be as effective. So they may have to use Beasley more than per usual as kind of their move the chains type option where, 3rd and 2 in a normal game, they could just give the ball to Elliott and be done with it and have a first down. So I'm going to like it either way, whether Dez Bryant plays or not. I actually think it could help him if Dez plays, but if he doesn't play, if he doesn't matter. This price tag is good enough for me. I think we get 7 receptions for 70 yards from Cole Beasley this week. So I love him in all formats. Let's go to tournaments only though, Jim. Who do you got? I mean, if we got the cheap guys in cash, then we got to like the expensive guys in tournaments, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I actually like Allen Robinson to a degree here. I think his ownership will be pretty low because people do. I mean, whether we want to say it or not, people look at the number that's next to the matchup number. The Bears have been somewhat respectable against, in terms of fantasy metrics allowed to receivers. I think some of that's skewed, though, because you can run on the Bears. So I don't know how often teams game plan really to get their points in the air. I don't trust that this Jacksonville team can run. They still – the way that they get Yeldon going is total yards. It's not really – even against the Colts, he only ended up with 70 yards. So I just think in terms of ceiling, he's one of these guys who has that multi-touchdown tournament kind of shifting ceiling. And, if you're going to be in tournaments, you're going to want to get ways to multi-stack, team stack, against the Saints. So I think Kelvin Benjamin, even though his price isn't that depressed, when we say a tournament guy, sometimes that can be seen as fluff. Like, you don't really know what you're expecting. Well, that's the truth here, right? I don't know what I'm expecting with Kelvin Benjamin, right? I'm throwing my hands up and saying he doesn't have a floor, right? Because he's disappeared the last 2 weeks, even with Cam Newton. So it's really just a red zone thing, and it's the idea that this could be a 60-point, point total game. It's projected for 53, so that's not even that dramatic. So he's a guy I think that you're going to want to get shares of to make a difference. And conversely, I think Brandon Cooks is the guy that everybody's off of right now. He's been really quiet since that first game. He hasn't really won anybody any money since week 1. So I think getting shares of that shootout is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'm actually going a different way there. I like Willie Snead, who supposedly is close to 95% was the quote that just came out, which is a really strange thing to say. But he's got the best individual matchup of the bunch against this Robert McClain fella who hangs out in the slot most of the time. 83% of the time in the slot. So I'm going that way. I've seen a lot of people write about Michael Thomas. So you and I are kind of on the right side of this, at least in terms of ownership, because I think everyone's going to spend down for, the cheap Saints receiver. And with Snead back, I'm not sold that Thomas gets enough volume to really truly matter. So I really think that we are onto something here with the Snead and Cooks duo. If you're going to go with Breeze, but besides that, there's a few other spots I like. How about Amari Cooper against Phillip Gaines? I think, people are considering Michael Crabtree the number 1 receiver in the long run. That might be true. But I think Amari Cooper's too good to be held down for an extended period of time. I think this is a very good matchup for him, especially in the individual of the individual variety. So I think Cooper gets it done if you're spending up. How about Larry Fitzgerald? This one's a little difficult because I like both him and John Brown, but I'm going to stick with Fitzgerald here for a second when I say that, he's got kind of a tough, at least what's been the toughest individual matchup against Buster Screen in the slot so far this year, especially with, Revis being pretty terrible. But he's Larry Fitzgerald. I mean, Screen's good, not great. So I think, this whole Cardinals offense, I really, really like. I think they're Monday Night Football this week, right?
They are, yeah. I love John Brown here. I mean, the last two games he played with Palmer, he had 26 targets or something crazy like that total. He had the one game where he just kept getting fed. A couple big plays were missed in that Buffalo game. I just think, we saw this happen last year. John Brown's a better receiver than Michael Floyd. He just is better at football. His route tree is amazing. If you look at like Matt Harmon, who shares those advanced route trees, and Brown runs one of the cleanest route trees in the league. I mean, there's a reason he's always there for Palmer. If we're buying a Palmer bounce back and how vertical they go, that verticality, I mean, the Jets have given up 3 70-yard touchdowns already this year. That's like a historic type allowance. They're giving up 8.4 yards per attempt, the most in the league. I just think it's kind of a matchup of strength on weakness.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's just so many, because I'm so set on cash, and usually, there's more receivers to choose from than there is running backs. I got a lot here that I'm going to give you, but I'm going to have shares of all these guys. I mean, I'm not just saying these. AJ Green in a game where I think they're going to be playing from behind against the Patriots. I know a lot of people, worry about the Patriots shutting down the number one option. I'm not really that worried about it. I actually like Green better than Antonio Brown this week.
Malcolm Brown's not a shutdown corner, right?
Right. Right.
And the thing is, Logan Ryan's on pace to give up 105 receptions this year, which Pro Football Focus says is the most in the last 12 years. So
there you go. That just makes me like him all the much more. And I know a lot of people are on Cameron Meredith, but the better individual matchup is Eddie Royal. So if I'm going to take a stand on a Bears receiver this week, I'm going Eddie Royal against Devon House. With Royal back, I think that Meredith only had that big week because Royal was out. I think Royal's still the guy ahead of him on the depth chart. They'll probably both get some work, but obviously, you're going to have to spend down somewhere. We like all the expensive running backs, so I think Royal would be my preference if you're not using Beasley in tournaments. Do you have anything else to say at the wide receiver position?
Yeah, just one last thing. If you're playing rosters, which I advise you do, I think it's fun to differentiate with like a third site or a fourth site. These other sites besides the big two. I know you're a big fan of fantasy draft. It's fun to engage in a different pricing market, and you can find different inefficiencies. And one that I found on rosters this week is I agree with you that Cam Meredith can be a fade candidate on DraftKings and FanDuel because of the price is, relative to his he's got a rising stock, so the price is up. He's the pricing floor on rosters. He's 5,000. But put that in perspective, it's a 90,000 budget. So, I mean, 5,000 is literally like what it costs to have a kicker in that league. So, rosters is a really interesting way to differentiate your experience, and I think Cam Meredith is a guy that you could get in there, and then you can afford an Antonio Brown and not worry about it.
Yep, there you go. Two guys on DraftKings at the floor that are interesting are Aiken and Goodwin. Marquise Goodwin, if we think Tyrod's going to have a good game and he's the deep threat, all he's got to do is catch one long one. And Aiken's a guy who's going to see. So, yeah, to check, obviously, the prices on each site, that matters very much. I mean, we're kind of just giving it in a broad sense, which is hard to do because there's so many different sites out there. But I will give you a few specific to DraftKings that I think those, if you absolutely want to spend up everywhere and just really, really punt, those are the spots to do it on DraftKings. But that's all for us for the wide receivers. Please check out that trial that I showed you at the beginning of the show. That's rotocurve.com/NFL-trial. You get exclusive rankings, projections, cheat sheets, must-have tools like EVP rankings, points per attempt, red zone, optimized lineups, and about infinity billion other things that are worth having. So check that one out. We will be right back here with some stacks for this week to finish off the video series.